going to bring up our panelists from Cologix, if he's here. And I'm going to just, as you guys take your seats, I'm going to walk you through just a couple of setup slides for Matt, Paul, and Andre, if he's here. Although I don't see Andre. So it's okay. So quickly on defining the SMB working group started with the assumption that all organizations will either become hybrid organizations or will transition through hybrid on-prem and cloud-based technology to an end state where they're cloud only. And some of the characteristics of hybrid, which actually Mary wrote this slide, so you know this better than I do. It's are the notion, there's 6 key issues in the transition. Location, readiness, shadow IT, and control of shadow IT. The standards of clouds, which we talked about quite a lot in the last session. Canada-specific issues, which would apply, for example, to our healthcare, government, and a little bit to our financial services case in terms of data residency. And then a bunch of decision factors that we covered off in the last session. In terms of, what are your business objectives, what are the drivers, what are the available skills within your organization, and those sorts of constraints that help you to bridge between cloud adoption, which in an SMB often comes from end users, and traditional infrastructure. The notion, again from Mary's group, was that hybrid cloud can be defined as offering answers to 4 questions that each SMB has in varying degrees. How much do you need to support temporary workloads like the scale up seasonally for the retailer? How much do you have to meet on-demand requirements like marketing's request for a new campaign? How much do you have to be able to scale with growth? How much self-service, like with the healthcare example that Matt discussed in terms of patient access to records, do you need to be able to support? These become determining factors in what kind of platform, what kind of architecture you need to support your cloud. And then we walk through, again in this report, which is available to you through the library, 5 steps in a decision process. What is your existing infrastructure? If you have a lot of existing infrastructure, your step into cloud will probably start with private. If you don't have much, it will probably start with public cloud. What kind of data do you have? If you're like the Ministry of Weather and you have lots of regulated data, or the healthcare industry, you'll likely go private. If you're more like the retailer or the manufacturer, you may be more inclined to go public. I'll step out of the way for those of you taking pictures of this. But the types of applications that you're running drive whether or not you need orchestration or whether you can live with point solutions. Although I think we'd argue, and Alex, you're a proponent of this, that point solutions will ultimately run out of headroom. And then requirements for scale and how to pay for your infrastructure. And there are some wildcards that apply here. Utilization rates matter. If your utilization rates are high, you can probably do okay with on-premise equipment. If your utilization rates are low, it will cost you more money to buy and support the equipment than it would cost you to deliver an equivalent level of service via the cloud. To the point that Matt made repeatedly, if you don't have good security staff in-house, you're probably going to need to hire them one way or the other. They're likely to connect in through the cloud. To a point that Dave Collins likes to make quite a lot about manufacturing, if you have applications that read-write a lot, like shop floor applications, cloud may not be the right idea for you. If you have latency requirements. If you have in-house infrastructure that you're currently depreciating, you will take an accounting hit if you unplug that infrastructure to go to cloud. So there needs to be a rational migration path, oftentimes involving using cloud first for disaster recovery and then moving on. And lastly, I mean, it's important to understand the full scope of costs, including what happens if our cloud goes down. So with that, I'd like to go straight to our panel. Andre isn't with us, which will give you guys more time to monopolize the microphone over there. Actually, I'm monopolizing them at the moment. I have both of them. But you guys, oh, you have a laugh. Okay. All right, you're prepared. So Paul, as long as you're prepared, let's go ahead and see if I can get you to click in that first link. Here are the 6 issues that we said define a hybrid IT organization. If you're a senior exec with an SMB, if you're the owner or the general manager of a retailer or a small financial services firm, where do you start? What starts your journey?
Mike, I'm going to go with the easy one. I'm going to go with cloud readiness. So,
Okay.
you know, when we talk to our customers, we see a lot of customers in the spot I would call rowing it and bailing, right? Where their business has made a decision to go to cloud. They're trying to develop their strategy on the fly. So really, when we talk about cloud readiness, we talk about a couple of things. We talk about, you know, from a financial perspective, if I'm looking at a hyperscale cloud, do I understand, you know, how that cloud is going to be billed for? Ian had mentioned a scenario where, you know, you kind of go, you have this smorgasbord of cloud services that you can subscribe to. Do you have anything in place that protects you from oversubscribing, from getting that kind of, oh my God, look at the bill from cloud at the end of the month? So from a cloud readiness perspective, do you understand financially how you're going to be billed? Do you have controls in place for what can be subscribed to in cloud? The other thing is, you know, from the term of managing a hybrid IT environment, it's something that's thrown around quite a bit, but it's a difficult thing to do. So do you have visibility not only in the enterprise, but also in the, from a hyperscale cloud perspective? The last thing that Michael had mentioned when he talked about turning on all of these capabilities in the cloud platform, so turning on IoT, turning on analytics, do you have a good grasp of your applications that'll actually take advantage of that capabilities, right? So within an enterprise, we have multiple applications. Some of them are more kind of lights on sort of applications. Some of them are very strategic. Do we know the set of applications that we want to take to cloud, and we want to turn on these new capabilities to start tracking things like data analytics and things of that nature? Yeah.
Now, if you approach this from a healthcare perspective, where do you start on these issues?
Well, I love to go to shadow IT just because it's such a, healthcare is a challenging environment because you have these clinicians that are trying to do their best to take care of people, or in my case, we actually do online education, and it's just educators trying to get the word across, and there's a lot of collaboration also with outside organizations, and because of the regulatory environment, we are stuck using really ineffective tools and are limited in what we can do, and the natural tendency is then to just say, okay, I don't have time to deal with this regulatory stuff. I need to do this right now. So I'm just going to send it over my personal Gmail or drop it onto Dropbox or sort of whatever other things that are going on. So I think sort of when looking at moving to the cloud, it's a good time to sort of take an assessment and find out what people are actually using. Where are they running into issues, and almost do like a needs assessment. Find out where people are spending their time that they feel isn't valuable, and in most cases you can either automate that, or if you find that a lot of people are using Dropbox, okay, maybe you need a cloud-based file sharing solution that you can control in some way so that people don't just throw a file up there and then 2 months later or 3 months later or a year down the line, it gets downloaded by some random person and you have a security breach.
I've heard that using your own private email server for sensitive information can be a bad thing. I'm sure I heard that somewhere. If we could go to the click back. Yeah, go ahead and give that one a click, Stuart. And so the next question is, as part of the hybrid cloud drivers and benefits, we looked at 4 objectives. If you were going to add a 5th objective, go ahead and click on that. If you're going to add a 5th objective to support for temporary workloads, meeting on-demand requirements, scale, and self-service, what would you add as a 5th thing? What's the missing cloud here?
So in my mind, one of the kind of the huge benefits, but also inherently one of the huge risks is kind of the global nature of cloud. So you think about you know, kind of creating that hybrid IT environment from a small business perspective. What you're doing is you're essentially connecting to a global platform where you can light up a data center, you know, in any region of the world. So from a capability perspective, all of a sudden you have amazing capabilities. It was mentioned kind of a few times in, if you are an organization that wants to reach customers in different locations of the world, you can now do that. But inherently, that is a huge element of risk, right? Because you now run the risk of having some of your IT assets deployed in regions potentially that you had no intention of doing business. So if I were to add a fifth thing there, it'd be kind of the global nature of cloud and the scale of cloud, and just making sure that as much as you appreciate the fact that you're connecting to something that is now available around the world, that you've got some controls in place to make sure that your folks are only deploying to regions that you want to do business in.
Thanks. And that would be inherent to the China supply chain example as well. Matt, how about you? Which one would you add?
Well, just to tack on to that around the other regions, with the European Union General Privacy Data Protection Regulations coming in May, we actually did a scan of, okay, do we actually have any European customers? Because we do online education for Ontario, but because we're out on the internet, anybody can come and find us. We actually have people coming to us from the Caribbean, we trained a few nurses in Africa just recently. So we said, okay, there's this legislation coming into the European Union. How exposed are we actually to that? Do we have European Union customers we don't know even about, that we don't have to take their laws and privacy and whatever other regulatory framework into account?
Thanks.
But in terms
So
of...
you would have global there, but what other one would you put?
I would say taking advantage of things that are already built. So like the previous panel was talking about, you likely don't need to build your own custom support desk system. You can use Zendesk. I'm a big proponent of open source solutions. Even if you don't end up hosting it yourself or hosting it in the cloud somewhere, somebody has already run into your problem and they've probably solved it 80 to 90% of the way there. So you can take their solution and either rent it, buy it as a service, or if it's open source, build on top of it, add on to it, take advantage of the community of practice that already exists within it, of people that are facing the same problem, and focus on the things that differentiate you again, not sort of rebuilding things from scratch just because you can or you feel you need to.
Thank you very much. Let's just go to the third, whoops. I think this is the third, well, here. Let's go to the third question. And yeah, last topic that I covered off was navigating public-private hybrid decision process. Matthew, maybe we can start with you this time. You are an SMB IT manager. What advice do you give to your peers when you talk to them about navigating this process? Where do you advise them to focus or to look, or what do you advise them to do?
I like to sort of recommend that they look at their operations and at first figure out what can they run their business without? Sort of what is the absolutely mission critical thing? If this thing went away for a day or a week, we would be out of business at the end of that week. And then sort of focus on, okay, these are the things that we could last a few things without. Our mailing list software, maybe our marketing campaign software. If it's out for a week or something, we can still survive. We can switch to another cloud marketing provider or something, and it'll be mostly business as usual. And then for the really mission critical things, that's where you spend the time to make sure that you are not locked into a platform that may go out of business on you, or that will suddenly make changes that you don't want to make or that impact your business in negative ways. And then that's where you spend the time and effort to really assess.
Perfect. Thank you. Paul, what would you add to that in terms of advice?
I agree with I agree with Matt.
That advice is
so,
good.
So I think in my mind he was talking about data classification and the types of applications that you run, right? So from this kind of matrices, focusing on those two things, right? So cloud, when you go to cloud, you can get anything you want. So you can get any amount of kind of availability and redundancy that you want to pay for, right? So the important thing is kind of looking at your business applications and understanding the sensitivity of your data and classifying those things to make sure that as you determine that this application goes up the cloud, that you're only paying for what you need and no more, as opposed to paying for everything, right? And if you do the classification, then you understand the critical data of your data. And if you do the classification around your applications, you understand which applications are driving your business. The third one I would add to there, though, is existing infrastructure. So a lot of times what we've seen is that, in our enterprise infrastructure, we've kind of, taken advantage of virtualization over some time. Our virtualization environments have scaled out. We've got a lot of inefficiencies there. So even looking at your existing infrastructure, doing things like hyper-converged infrastructure, reducing your licensing cost, to me it's a way of kind of driving efficiencies and reducing your costs in the enterprise. And I also think by looking at those stuff, that class of technology, you're also building the components that make it easy to federate to hyperscale cloud. So kind of those three things. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Questions? Questions for our panel?
One thing just to add, in terms of support also, think about what kind of support you can get from your cloud vendor. We're having an issue right now where emails we're sending out to activate accounts for people are being flagged as spam by Microsoft servers. On Office, as an Office 365 customer, in theory, we should be able to reach somebody at Microsoft to say, well, hey, our emails aren't spam, you're doing something wrong, but I've spent a month trying to resolve this issue and I haven't made any progress at all because these huge vendors, God forbid you can actually get a hold of a real person. So again, look at your also support.
Upstairs today selling each other on their ability to answer that question.
You can reach them now.
Which is why you come here to get like the not so like polished corporate news.
So consider sort of what it takes to get a hold of somebody to fix when things are broken.
Thank you. We got time for a question before lunch. Who's got it? Mary, you've got it.
So I'm thinking about the workload decision making that you would do, and you mentioned business critical applications have to have a special decision making process around them. But what are some of the other criteria that an organization would use to decide which workload is appropriate for what cloud? So it's not just protect the workloads that have to be up all the time. There must be other things that people think about from an application perspective or a workload perspective.
That's a great question. So I think from the customers that we're dealing with, it comes down to a couple of different things. Is that there's some very operational focused workloads. And the decision really they kind of are making around those workloads is, do I want to continue to manage it within my own environment, or do I want to have do I want to move it to someone else's environment? Now I don't need kind of I may not need the analytics, the IoTs of the world. I really kind of just need those things moved and managed for me. So those the kind of the decisions around the operational workloads. I would say, kind of the, for those workloads that are critical to the business, the decisions are, when I move to public cloud, we do a lot of kind of migrations to public cloud. Migrations is a misnomer, right? So when you go to public cloud, it truly is a development platform, with enhanced capabilities. And a lot of what you're doing is you're not kind of migrating to cloud, you're translating to cloud, right? To take better advantage of some of the capabilities of the platform. So I think the other decisions that come into play is, if I've got this critical business application, is it worth the engineering effort to do the translation because I can turn up things like analytics and get better, customer information if that's the sort of thing that I'm looking for. When I'm migrating to hyperscale cloud, do I have a big data strategy? So, my analogy of big data right now is it's kind of like, it's the summer project that your wife gives you. How, your wife goes, oh, we got to do all this stuff in the garden this year. And you order that big pile of dirt, and then you put it at the bottom of the driveway, cover it with a tarp, and hope nobody asks about it. That's most people's big data strategy, right? So, the other things to think about is that start collecting it, right? Hope no one asks about it for a while, but eventually develop a strategy, to do something with it. Yeah.
There's actually concept in education, so Matthew knows it much better than I do, called SAMR. You've seen that, right? And it's a model of technology adoption that starts at substitution. And this actually hits at some of the stuff Matt was saying in the last panel, too. The first thing you do with any new technology is just basically replicate what you were doing before you had it.
Yep.
And then the next step is augmentation. So you start to learn ways to make the stuff that you've just substituted a little bit better. Mm-hmm. And then you get to the more advanced levels where you're actually introducing new things that you couldn't do before, and finally achieving outcomes that were previously unimaginable with the stuff that you had. But I mean, the point is, it's a journey, right? And Matt, and most SMBs are not going to hire PwC to come in and say, what are your change management objectives? But that doesn't mean that having change management objectives isn't a bad idea, because you're absolutely right. I mean, that's what happens. Is the first thing you do is substitute, and the next thing you do is you build the mound of dirt. But success only comes when you use the dirt to do something you couldn't have done before.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
Matthew, do you have any last words to kind of add, words of wisdom?
One sort of surprising thing that at least caught me off guard is when you do have things up in the cloud of software as a service vendors, they tend to interoperate and build ways to transfer data between themselves without you even asking them. It's sometimes a surprising gift that like we started up with Office 365 recently, and oh look, we have access to Power BI, so we can build all these dashboards, and oh look, there's a Google Analytics plugin, so now we can pull all of a sudden all of our data about our web analytics, how many visitors we're getting, what's their conversion rates, pull that into a nice dashboard without really having to do any work. The vendors have done the work for you. And I mean, even at UHN, there's a huge silo problem. Everybody's building their own custom solution, and the data sits in there, and getting the data out and connected to other systems has so much potential, but doesn't happen because it's so difficult to build these interconnections. With your data sitting out in the cloud, it is in theory safer it's easier to build the data connections, not necessarily safer. yes, wrong word there. It's safer as long as you take the right precautions. And actually, oftentimes it can be safer because it's not an Access database sitting underneath somebody's desk that can disappear overnight.
There is that. Any other questions for our panel? One way in the back? Oh, two way in the back.
Sorry. I guess a percentage of users who want that silo approach for a specific requirement versus vendors who have architected the system to operate that way for any number of reasons. Like, where's the mix? What's the number in that mix?
It's hard to put a percentage on it, but from what I've seen, most vendors that are operating in the cloud as a service, they realize that data portability and data exporting is a key decision factor. In my experience, they at least will let you at least get an export out, and if I can't get my data out of a vendor, honestly, I'm not going to engage with them. I'm not going to buy from them to begin with. So I think, again, I don't know the percentage, but I think they are aware of it, and it's sort of a necessary feature for them to compete in the space, I would say.
I had heard that, kind of the Azures and the Amazons, the GCPs of the world, they built their, hyperscale cloud strategy based on between 28 to 34% of what's in the enterprise going to public cloud. So a vast portion is still kind of being slated for the enterprise, at least kind of in the near term. But they haven't built their models based kind of 100% adoption of public cloud. So.
And we have one more question in the back. Go ahead.
Last question. Let's say that your Office 365, you decided not to go with them. Like, how are you going to migrate to another vendor? Like, did you think about that?
Well, it's sort of like asking, what if we can't use Microsoft Word? What are we going to use instead? It's in my opinion, Microsoft more or less has a monopoly right now on collaboration software, and that's not really a problem because it's working. They're not charging huge fees. I think it's very reasonable for what you're getting. There's a lot of value in it, but I mean, it's UHN. It took about a year of planning and another year of actually moving things to Office 365 from on-premise mailboxes. So it is a huge, long project. And if Microsoft decided, okay, we're not offering Office 365 anymore, yeah, it would be another year or two to move things out to another system, whether it's Gmail or back on-premise. I mean, there really isn't a good answer to that because there's so much data. You're limited by your bandwidth and how fast you can even move. Yeah, I mean, they sort of have you by the by the jewels in that case.
And Ian mentioned the term data gravity. So one of the things, like we do a lot of Office 365 migrations. The easiest ones are from the enterprise to Office 365. The hard ones are between tenants, because inherently in Microsoft, they give users oodles of storage, right? And if you don't have to deal with archiving and all that other, controlling the size of the mailboxes, users think it's great, right? They get all of this space. They use mail as primary storage. But to your point, the more that you simplify the user's life, the more data gravity that you have. And Ian had already spoken about it. Is that it is something that you have to kind of consider. It's a good question.
Any other questions? Thank you so much. That was really terrific. And